From prison escapes to graffiti that highlights the suffering mind of the prisoners, what dark events occurred at Burlington County Prison? Hey there, dissectors. Today we're going to delve into the murky waters of a prison that was in service for 154 years, opening for business way back in 1811. The well-thought-out architecture for the prison came from Robert Mills, who was one of America's first native-born trained architects. Unlike other prisons at the time that were struggling with fire outbreaks, fighting and destruction of property, Burlington County was different. It had vaulted ceilings of poured concrete, and with its brick and stone walls, it all came together to make the structure fireproof. It consisted of a basement and 2 floors that held the inmates, originally built to handle 40 prisoners. Cell blocks were split into 4 individual cells, with each holding people who had committed similar crimes. 3 of these categories were women, habitual criminals and first offenders. Each cell had its own fireplace, something unheard of when you think of past prisons we've covered. While the warden controlled the males, his wife supervised all the women who were locked away. Now, back in 1811, people who got behind with their payments would be thrown in prison too. Now, because they'd not found themselves inside due to a crime, they were treated much differently. They were kept in larger rooms situated off the main hallways and could contain 3 to 4 men in each room. These inmates would be allowed to walk freely around the place during daylight hours while being employed in the workshop to work off their debts. The basement of Burlington County Prison was designed for many things. It housed a workshop where men and women were expected to learn a skill that they could use to aid them upon their release. There was also the kitchen and dining room, as well as controlled access to the exercise yard. This was secured by a 20-foot high wall. Now, as you can imagine, there were also the more serious criminals locked away inside too. If you were placed in maximum security, you'd find yourself on the 2nd floor of the prison, in a room surrounded by viewing areas for guards and visitors. There was a ring in the centre of the room, which the inmate would be chained to, as well as no fireplace. The only light came from a small window located high up on the wall. Now, you can imagine how cold that room could be, especially with no fire. But often, inmates didn't stay for more than 1 night in this room, as the next day, they'd be hung. For years, the maximum security area has seen the spirit of a prisoner called Joel Clough. In life, he was sent to Burlington County for killing his girlfriend by blunt force trauma, and was hung for his crime in 1850. Inmates and visitors to the prison have heard the sound of moaning, chains rattling, seen objects move around on their own, and the full-bodied apparition of Clough himself sitting in the cell. There are many other unexplained events witnessed in the maximum security cell, but to be fair, I'd be surprised if there hadn't been, as the high levels of stress and fear played out in this room was bound to leave a mark. The crimes that could find you on death row at the time were murder, burglary, rape, home invasion, highway robbery, treason, and horse theft. Outside in the yard, there was a place for the portable gallows the prison had for its hangings, and if you were convicted of a capital crime in Burlington County, you can be sure your execution would take place here. The last execution held at the prison was in 1906, and it was quite a doozy. It was a double hanging for 2 murderers named Rufus Johnson and George Small. In January 1906, these heinous men murdered a young woman named Florence Allinson. She was found brutalised in a barn at a farm that she worked at. These men not only raped her, but strangled her with a strap of leather they'd removed from a cow's blanket. When this didn't kill her quick enough, they beat her around the head with a club, severely crushing her skull. As if that's not bad enough, these 2 men then went over to Florence's house, knocked on the door, and were greeted by her 5-year-old daughter. They pushed the child aside and stole items which were thankfully later recovered. But the child got revenge for her mother. You see, they probably didn't feel that a child was any threat to them, but the young girl had seen their faces and gave a fantastic description of the men to the police. It didn't take long for Johnson and Small to be caught by celebrated detective Ellis H. Parker. Just 2 months after the horrendous murder, justice was brought down on the men as they hung on March 24th, 1906. Today, their spirits are said to haunt the gallows along with others who met their maker at the end of a rope. The gallows are now on display for visitors to the museum. Worth noting is that people were so enraged by the crime the men had committed that when the last man was cut down from the gallows, the rope was cut up into small pieces and sold to several witnesses. Prisons are not nice places to be, and as I'm sure we can all agree, But back then, life was even tougher. Newspaper clippings from the prison's time show that there were many fights inside, suicides, jailbreaks, and that an inspector found at one point the inmates had no beds and were being forced to sleep on the cold, hard floor. There were numerous escape attempts made over the years, but in 1875 one was carried out that is believed to have been partially successful. 5 inmates teamed up and punched a hole in an upper corridor ceiling, then climbed down a massive pile of wood that had been stacked by the prison wall. Now, one of the men was too large to fit through the hole that they'd made, and so had to be left behind, and in good team spirit figured, well, if I can't get away, neither can you, and alerted the guards to the escape. Even though the warden and guards acted quick to the alarm, some inmates were never caught. By 1965, the prison was overcrowded, holding around 100 inmates, and so the decision was made to move them to a larger location, an old converted armoury behind the prison. This location was used until 1983, when a new prison was built. In 1999, renovation work started on the prison museum, and it was at this point the rumoured paranormal activity could not be ignored. The workers experienced disembodied voices, the sound of screaming and banging noises throughout the building. They would also put down their tools, only to discover that they'd been moved and were later found on another floor, or, worse yet, a different location on the grounds. I'm sure you can imagine the atmosphere the men were working in, and it got so bad. The workers started to leave early as they feared being left alone at the prison. This alerted the officials that there really was a problem, and so called in the South Jersey Ghost Research Team to either confirm or deny the claims of a haunting, hoping it would calm the men down. But this didn't work, as all it did was prove the men were right to be concerned. Dave Giuliano of Shadowlands.net was present for the investigation and reported that a spirit was observed in the shower area, and a stretcher parked next to the maximum security cell moved on its own, setting off sensors. But if you're wondering how the prisoners felt while they were locked away inside, there is graffiti around the prison which can be seen today, and it reveals the thoughts and feelings of the men while locked up. And while you might think that other prisons have graffiti, what is so unusual at this place? Most prisons will have obscene language and violence depicted, as well as plenty of pornography. But at Burlington Prison, inmates were more creative, producing pieces of art on the walls from the 1950s to the 1960s. The writings also gave an insight into what life was like inside. Today, the prison has changed very little, as it still has the same huge front door and handle. The vaulted ceilings and brick and stone walls are pretty much unchanged. Even the cell doors are original. It really does give you a feel of what life was like inside Burlington County Prison all those years ago. So, dissectors, what do you make of today's haunted location? Do you feel the place is as haunted as people believe? What story creeped you out or pulled on your heartstrings the most? Let me know in the comments. I must say the murder of Florence by Johnson and Small was heartbreaking to hear. And what a bloody nerve they had to then rob the house in front of a child. I'm glad they got the comeuppance in the end. I hope this video finds you well, and if you are wanting to discover more haunted locations, why not check out some of my other episodes or shorts. Until next time, my friends, as always, stay safe out there.